That's enthusiasm. Okay, let's make sure we're getting sound now. We are getting sound. Okay, so we got to finish up because we're right in the middle of kind of a big deal. It's kind of an important little thing called racism. And the thing about history is, yes, there are facts and dates, and yes, it might seem like a long time ago, and you have to know facts and dates. Not every one, but nothing will make sense unless you have a background material. But it all relates to today. What happened in 1676 released a reaction to Bacon's rebellion directly affect us at this very moment. And without knowing how that happened, it would be virtually impossible to do something like, I don't know, maybe alleviate the problems that it caused. Because if you don't know what caused them, how could you ever fix it? And that's why I really want to make clear that first I'll have to switch masks. Just pop, my nose pops out. Wait, I'm going to breathe in some dust. Okay. I feel like I'm getting paper mask lung, just filling up with all the powder. Okay.
New compensation act.
Huh?
Now the new compensation act come out. You wore face masks.
Oh, God.
2020 year.
I don't even want to think about what's going to happen after this. That very well could happen. All right, so we got Bacon's rebellion, and they rebelled, and yes, his personal big issue was the fact they didn't have protection from American Indian attacks. Oh, I almost forgot something. I'm sorry. I'm not setting up the camera. Is today September 11th, and so that is the anniversary of the September 11th, 2001 attack on the United States, where nearly 3,000 Americans died. It's the second bloodiest day in American history. You know what the bloodiest day is?
Was it Civil War?
Yeah, the Battle of Antietam. The single bloodiest day in American history. Most casualties, most people died. Yeah.
When we went to New York, I went to
So you went to the memorial, and then.
it's like a cool waterfall and stuff.
And it's based on the old footprint of it. And did you go up in the new tower?
No, I don't think we were there.
The last time I was there, I tried to go up in the new tower, and the line was literally 4 hours long to go up, go up to the 100 floors. And I thought, no. You know. And the worst part was the remnants of a hurricane was which is dumping rain. But that horrible attack, and that had a great effect on the United States to this day. And it's amazing how people get misconceptions, they know half truths. I'll ask you. You're all very smart, but you haven't had a lot, probably a significant amount of information on it. The terrorists who attacked that day, what country were most of them from? So they're not from the United States. Where?
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, almost all from Saudi Arabia. Good. Yeah. A couple from the Egypt, Lebanon, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. But Afghanistan had been going through war since 1979, poor Afghanistan. And the U.S. actually helped this certain group you might have heard of it, called Al-Qaeda, to go to Afghanistan to fight the Soviets way back in the 80s. And that would become, it was just a tiny little group, only, it was tiny. This was this attack was the end of the group. Anybody that said they're Al-Qaeda after the September 11th attack, it's just taking a name. But the CIA helped them establish. We'll talk more about this when we get closer to that time, that'll be in May. I wonder if we'll still be like this with masks on. We should do a pool if that wasn't illegal, but have a betting pool. What day, how long this will last with masks. You know what I think the best bet would be?
April.
Yes.
Let's see. Please not. But whatever, we'll just deal with it. That would be awesome. But they were in Afghanistan, and then the Civil War, after the Soviets pulled out, they kept going on. That's where they trained, but nobody was from Afghanistan. And then after the attack, the U.S. did not invade. Everyone says they did. People say it all the time, including they said it at the time. Afghanistan was going through a civil war, and we picked a side. And they just moved in. So it's kind of a weird kind of invasion. But then the United States did invade a country. And what country was that? Iraq. And what did Iraq have to do with the September 11th attack? Nothing.
There's a terrorist.
Yeah, it's oil.
Has a link between the two countries.
They weren't terrorists. And Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with it. Yeah, in fact, Saddam Hussein's mortal enemy were people like Osama bin Laden. And I'm kind of bitter about this because I know people who went there. I know, one person I know was killed in fighting there. And also I know someone else who was horrifically wounded. And he'd been in the Army for 20 years and was just about ready to come out. And he's horrifically wounded on disability back. He's from Alcide, I graduated from high school with him. And he was an intelligence officer and was in a vehicle with an IED, an explosive device, which is the term that comes out of the Iraq War. And so and it still affects us to this day. And so we'll talk more about the Brits. And they had certain goals when they attacked the United States. And we basically did everything they wanted us to do. And they wanted us to get out of Saudi Arabia, we did. They wanted us to attack, and we did. They wanted us to flail and make enemies, and we did. So it's a sad thing. It really bothers me. So this is the anniversary of it. And we will come back and talk about this, but there's a long train of events. So I wanted to just say that. And one thing that's hard about this is you weren't born yet, but it still greatly affected you. And I was born, I was alive, I was teaching. In fact, I was teaching in that room next door. I was in that room, we watched the towers come down in class. And we had it all. We had it all. TV is still weird. And so my personal views will taint the memory. And that's something about really hard to get modern history, talk about politics today, because all of you are living it now, what's happening. And so in 20 years, you're going to be tainted by your emotions, what happened then. It's really hard for us to get perspective. It's much easier to get perspective on something you didn't live through. That's why modern history is hard. It just is. And that's why I want to say that. September 11th, there's so many personal views, especially for people who did not live in places like New York City, but it was really scary. So, let's get back to something that's even more scary, the development of racism. So, we have Bacon's Rebellion. Everybody joined up with the rebellion. So we got through that yesterday, right? Everybody joined up. And where do we finish it here? At racism. What a weird thing to put. So we got slave codes, we got slavery change. Do we get here? Do we get this?
Yeah.
How about this?
Yes.
Why do we have this about power? Yeah, to maintain power. That is the whole goal of racism. Those who did it, now, please get out of your head, they weren't sitting there thinking, how do we develop racism? It wasn't that. It was just something happened and, oh, what do we do? Okay, well, we have to make sure they can't attack us again. And they were consciously thinking dividing and conquer, but they did not think racism. Did we write this down yesterday?
Yes.
And so its tentacles get everywhere. And I must add something. That means if it's laws, that's government and that's politics. That means it was, and then would become a choice. It's not natural like the sun coming up. It's a learned thing, and it's taught, and it's perpetuated, and it's reinforced. And it's not just reinforced for people who say, well, you're on top. It's also reinforced for those who they say are on the bottom, because that's what they're taught. And if you're constantly told that you're dumb or on the bottom, if you're constantly told that, eventually what are you going to believe? Don't you, sometimes you go down to your expectations or up. It does work both ways. And culture or economics is decided by government. These are choices. And culture, how much is culture decided by laws and how people make a living? This is, and it's a word that people, when I say the word politics, people just think about winning an election. No, this is politics. Politics are interaction between people and how decisions that affect our lives are made. That's politics. We get bogged down in who's going to win an election. And that is kind of unsavory sometimes. You know, it does seem that way. But the winners have great power, and that power is political. So sometimes you have to get past the election. Okay, some people really like the elections and like the fight between them. I'm not a huge fan just because so many elections are decided by people who don't really know much about politics. I'm somebody who has already decided who I'm going to vote for. I'm a member of a political party. I do all that. So I'm not one that like commercials are appealing to. Does that make sense? And so that's why I get bored with that. The commercials annoy me. And I follow it really close. But, all right, so back to this. These are political choices. These are choices that people make. By the way, if you want to maintain this power, and make sure you get this down. I forgot to write this down. If you want to maintain power, you want people to believe this was not a political choice. What do you want people to believe? It's what?
The natural order.
It's natural. This is the natural order of life. There were certain people on top and certain people on the bottom. And that's the way. How long has it been? How long has it been this way?
700 years.
But how long do they want people to believe it's this way? Forever. It's always been this way. We have no choice. Why do you want to fight against human nature? That's the way we are. How long do you suppose it took people to start to accept this was natural?
Very little time.
It's amazing how fast it takes, just a couple generations. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And so, what's the net result? Those on top stay on top. Not always, but it almost has to be a revolution in thought. And I think I said this yesterday, but I'll say it again. Sexism works exactly the same way. Exactly. They're so close. And so we have women are going to be oppressed in much the same way. And so, what we have developing is the concept of white supremacy. But let's be clear about it. It's white supremacy in the context that, okay, we're saying that whites are supreme, but not all whites, in fact, the vast majority of whites, are not benefiting from that supremacy necessarily, except for the one thing. What is it? Because if whites are superior, I almost forgot one thing before I jumped the gun. All it would take is one drop in the system of non-white blood, and you're now inferior. One drop. Because what is the law that said that the children of female slaves are slaves? What's that law? The most important of the slave codes. The fornication laws. And so you can almost do the math. If a master rapes their slave, the child is half European, half African descent. Does that make sense? If that child, that girl, she's raped again by a European, that's even more European descent, but they're still slave. And so on and so on and so on. But all it takes is that one legacy of slavery, of African slave, and they're not only going to be considered a slave, but since we're talking about a hierarchy of race, they're black. Or they're not white, is a better way of looking at it. And that is a key element. When Nazi Germany, when they were coming up with a law, series of laws are going to become the Nuremberg laws in 1934, and they're designating not only Jews but other people. The Nazis very much admired American racial policy, which is something we should not be proud of as a country. And this was too extreme for them. That was too extreme. But all it takes is one drop of blood that is not white, and you're no longer white, technically, according to this. And that legacy exists. Did I mention this yesterday with President Obama? Did I say that yesterday?
No.
So President Obama, and it goes to how much race is just kind of, it's like its tentacles just get into everything. And so they got to kind of differentiate if they're black or white or that. Well, he's of African and European descent. And yet what does everyone say he is? He's black. Now, because that's a legacy of this. And he self-identified as black, but that's fine. But that's a legacy of race. Racism that comes out of slavery. Because why isn't he white? He's just as, what is it? It's that. And it's pretty pernicious then, isn't it? Pernicious means kind of almost evil. It just gets into everything. And once it's there, it's just ingrained. So, what do poor whites have? Getting back to this. Whites are superior, but most whites don't have anything. Except what? They're not, or they're white. They don't have any political power, any economic power, almost no legal power. They have almost nothing, but they're white. And so they can always say, I'm better than you. It's not much, but it's something. And so that means any fight for equality for people underneath, actually to many white people, because it's almost always white supremacy, it looks like an attack on their rights. The same way that women's rights, look like an attack on men. When women demanded equality, men are like, well, I'm going to lose something. I don't have much, but at least I'm not you. And that's my position. And so you have the vast majority of working people are divided by race. So they fight amongst themselves. So here is a picture to promote slavery from the 1850s. And it says, this is the master and the mistress. It says, poor things, they can't take care of themselves. Implying that they're so inferior, we're actually helping them by enslaving them. And that became the ideology of the South. That would exist until a lot of places to this moment. If I had a watch, I'd be telling you the time. And here is from when racial, I think I have, this new concept of race, when biological science really began in the 1840s, 1850s, you see rumblings of it before that, they begin to divide everyone by race. And so here's from 1890, excuse me, and I'll show you other bits of this. But here are humans. But it's trying to say that there's differences, and it's all by color of skin, even though you can't see color. I think you can see the way they exaggerate features. Caucasian, and then darker the skin. And they show not only different faces, which is pure garbage. It's not science at all, but it says grades of intelligence. So race was not a way to differentiate people horizontally. I mean, like, okay, we have whites and all, just different colors. It's whites down. Does that make sense? And by the way, if you're on top, yeah, that's a good system. It reinforces itself. And then when you start making laws, customs, it becomes natural. And I put down the Confederacy. During the Civil War, the vast majority of soldiers who fought for the Confederacy, and the reason there was a Civil War was to protect slavery. And they fought, the vast majority, in fact, virtually all of the enlisted men, so the men who did most of the fighting, didn't have slaves and never would have slaves. They didn't have slaves. Most whites in the South did not have slaves. They couldn't afford them. Yet they fought and died to protect someone else's slavery, to protect someone else's wealth. And they were never going to get a penny of it. Why? I don't have much. But if I lose my little bit above, I lose everything. So that is such an important element of this. I'm making sure this is all broadcasting out. I didn't even realize that. Kind of a big thing. Wouldn't it be awful knowing, people are watching? By the way, if anyone's watching, if it's not coming in good, please let me know. Okay, most of it I think is just a picture of my back, but whatever, okay? They fought for that. Have you ever heard of Little Rock Central High? That was the first school in the former Confederacy that would be forcibly integrated. It's in Arkansas. And the school board of Little Rock, Arkansas chose Little Rock Central High because it was mostly poor working class neighborhood. People didn't have much there. White school. Why that school? Because they wanted integration to fail. And they picked a school where they know there'd be such resentment of these working class people who would fight so hard to keep what little they have. I got nothing, but I'm not going to lose this. They knew it. They did it on purpose. And yes, there were huge protests. In fact, President Eisenhower had to send in a battalion of the 101st Airborne Division to force integration. And they would fight that tooth and nail. And you can see elements of that. It's Bacon's rebellion thinking to this day. So it's pretty ingrained. This is what we call a big deal. Remember when I said this would change the world? Well, what happened? Every other colony followed this. And not just British colonies. Other countries were doing the same thing. When Britain started colonizing other places, they did the same thing. They brought it with them. When the United States was created, what was it created on? This basis. So this is a big deal. Oops. So, it's all about power. And those on top. It's ingrained in U.S. history. You can't escape it. It's in the Constitution. The Constitution, there are a number of elements in the Constitution that are specifically designed to protect slavery. To return runaway slaves, that there's property, that will give Southerners a big advantage in population. By the way, they counted slaves. Heck, there's even an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So there will be militias to put down slave rebellions. This is a big deal. This would justify the United States expanding westward because they could say we're taking the land from people who are inferior. And it gave them a justification besides just blatant greed, you know. It's not just, we want it because we want your land. It's, you guys are wasting it. We're going to help you. The United States would colonize places like, and conquer Puerto Rico, Hawaii, the Philippines, colonies. Here is a sign after Reconstruction when black men fought and got the right to vote, it would be taken away. It's justifying by look at the monster of, and they said, Negro rule. This is in 1890s North Carolina. Here, to stop the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. And you see this over and over again. We'll come when we talk about what the Confederate battle flag is going to mean for this and everything else. So it's a pretty long history, and this is important to understand. And once people think it's natural, then it's hard to ingrain. We see this with money, we see this with so many different things. And it's one of the many myths. But the reason this all happened was, remember plantations? Growing tobacco to make the colonies work? This is about economics. So, this is what we call a hard shift to a new heading, colonial economics. Maybe. Here we go, Mesopotamia. Yeah, so get to the colonial economy. Because once again, this comes back to economics. But I told you I wasn't going to cover some of those things in chapters 1 and 2, but this is why I feel I had to talk about Virginia. Because every colony would follow this. Every colony had slaves. Every colony adopted slave codes. Here's a very style, I need. So hard to breathe through this thing. Can I whine a little bit? Yes. Okay. We will come back to slavery, obviously, but we'll dip onto it the whole time. We'll mention it in here. But a couple things about this. What is it called? The desire to get an empire. The conquest and taking of an empire. What is that called? Yeah, imperialism. And what that means is getting an empire for profit. And soon there'll be a competition between countries for various reasons for the country first, got money, got technology, lots of lucky breaks, but it's empire for profit. Now profit is not more than money, it could also be prestige. But the big thing is they want money. When Britain began to colonize, part of their goal is we need to suck the money out of these colonies and to get rich. And this shows the 13 colonies. And by the way, I should add, as rich as these would become, these were the really wealthy colonies. These couple little islands and the bigger one, Jamaica. Why?
Sugar.
Sugar was literally more valuable than gold. Yeah.
Didn't that fund for most of the ships that they were built for wars?
Oh, sure, yeah. And also that's why Britain would be so involved in the slave trade. But it would also, the importance of these islands would be decisive in the United States becoming a country. We'll come back to that. That's another story. So, imperialism. Yes, the United States is imperialistic. The U.S. would conquer the land you're sitting on and make it a state. They conquered it. So it's a little bit different than these kind of empires. We'll come back to what an empire means, but one thing really important to understand. In the 13 colonies, they're separate, they're rural, they're divided. There was no sense of one unit. You see the same thing like in Australia. They were separate colonies. Something would pull them together. And they're still really diversified. A couple of things about it. There's no money. There's never going to be any money in the colonies. Especially, remember, if the British policy is to get money from imperialism, you think they'll leave any in the colonies? I'll tell you how they suck it out in a second. But there's always a shortage of money. And this will become a crisis after the Revolutionary War. And there's something else. Not only are colonies expensive for the British, but everything then in the colonies is expensive. When I mean expensive, don't think in terms of the price. What I mean is, if there's no money, how can you buy any goods you need? You just can't afford anything. And then the British, they still have to spend money to defend it, and yet the colonies have no money. So there's always a shortage of money. And Britain looks at it as, we're spending all this money to protect you, and the colonies are looking at it like, you're sucking all the money out of us. And the population would grow a couple big waves. 1630s, big waves, 1640s, but most of the people will come in the early 18th century, in the middle of the 18th century, for the colonies. But most of them were farmers, rural, not very many cities, but more Europeans than other places, and mostly men. That's part of the reason why the fornication laws. Mostly men. But they had more people in those 13 colonies than, let's say, New France. And what the British economic policy was this. This is a cheesy little diagram I just thought was funny. So, everyone fighting for their own piece of the pie. It's called mercantilism. And mercantilism is the economic policy of, in this context, Britain. Their government's policy. What do we call government's economic policy? In today's terms, that is macroeconomics. Macroeconomics is the economic policy for the entire country. So economics is actually divided up in the most simplistic way, two things. Policy for the government, macroeconomics. Policy in an individual market, anybody want to guess what that would be like? Instead of the entire economy, just looking at this buying and selling and creation of, let's say, cars, or boats, or frozen concentrated orange juice.
Microeconomy.
That's microeconomics, yeah. Most people get micro. Now I think it's funny when they talk to some economists about government policy and they're actually into microeconomics and they don't know. My brother is a economist. I have a minor in economics. School is fun. College was a lot cheaper then too, though. I'm sorry. I know, and you're also saying you had buildings back then? Yes, we did. So, this is the government policy of Britain. And it is the economic policy of imperialism. This would be the justification. This would be how we're going to scientifically come up with a way. This is a brand new thing. This economy or coming up with an economic policy. It's new. Now, do not write this down. I put it up there just because I was thinking when I was writing, but it came from France, Louis XIV. France would try to conquer like the Netherlands and a few other places to control natural resources. We're not going to worry about that for this class. I don't know why I wrote it down. But here's what I did. This is what we got to get done. All nations are in competition for one thing: gold. That's what they want. Gold is the one thing, and that's the global wealth. It's that concept. Gold is the one thing that every country, at least in Europe, accepted as some kind of value. That they could get value for gold. That gold could be used to get things that people need. Because you don't need gold, but you need food. You need shelter. You need heat. You need clothing. And by the way, that's economics. How do you deal with things that you have shortages of? Because there's not an unlimited amount of food, shelter, clothing, and heat. Because that's what we need. And so, competition for gold. And the idea is we're all these different countries are looking for gold. But gold is finite. And that's why I have this insane fixed. There's only so much gold in the world. Now you might say, what is it? Can't you just go dig a hole and find gold? That tends to be difficult. A big gold strike is almost impossible. There have been a few in history. There was a massive gold strike in, well, the New World. The Spanish did, even though not near as much as they wanted people to believe. 16th century. There'd be a couple smaller ones in the 18th century. A couple really big ones in the 19th century. U.S. like California, Montana, South Africa, Alaska. But for the most part, then you'd be a big increase in gold and then almost no increase for years. And so if everybody wants gold, and there's only so much gold in the world, that means we've got to get it from somebody else. And that's why the idea is, that's why we have pieces of the pie. If A gets bigger, that means the other countries have to lose. And that's mercantilism. This idea that we must, or we're in this battle for a set sum of money. In fact, it's literally called the zero-sum game. There's not going to be any more gold. So it's called zero-sum. That's it. We have this much. And if I take it, you lose. By the way, is that the way the economy works? No, it doesn't work that way at all. At all. Wealth is not finite. Wealth increases, and mostly all the time. Sometimes it decreases. Why is gold valuable?
Because there's a small amount.
Now, that's actually, it's an element of it, but a small amount of a lot of things. Why gold? There's a lot of pretty things. And gold really isn't that pretty. I know what you're thinking. When was he going to mention the Hittites? Now! The Hittites were the first one to really use it as a instrument of value. So, let's say I have wheat, and what do you have? Fur. Wool. You have wool. I have wheat. And this is the way people thought trade would. It actually didn't go this way. But also, we barter. I give you wheat, you give me fur. Or, what did I say? Wool. Is that, you know what I mean about bartering?
Yeah.
Is that the way it works? What if you don't need wheat at this moment? I need wool. What do? You see an impasse? I give you wheat, and now I owe you. Does that make sense? So what do we create? Debt. But how do we denote debt? We break a stick, and you get one stick, we put it together. Yeah, I'm not kidding, that's what they would do, things like that. When they first started making pottery, we'd break a piece of pottery, and then we'd come together. This is what we owe. You see where this is going? We need a placeholder to decide how much debt. Especially people who, let's say, the Hittite Empire, which were known for soldiers, and they would hire them off as mercenaries. They didn't want to carry debt or a piece of stick. They wanted something of value. So what could we use as a placeholder? Gold. Why gold? Tin, one of the first metals, brittle, breaks. Lead, too soft, way too soft. It's pliable, it's soft, but it also will tarnish. Silver, tarnishes. Iron, what does iron do? Rust. Copper, yeah, it turns green, right? Does gold? No. Gold's really too soft to use for tools. It is relatively rare, but they could find it. Those were the main metals at first. They also found mercury, but mercury is a liquid. No, they did not know how toxic it was. And lead, they had no idea how horrifically toxic lead is. Ask the Romans with their lead pipes.
What was the one metal that like the plates were made out of, and then like they thought tomatoes were like poisonous because the tomato acid would like mess with the plate? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Are you thinking about pewter?
Yes.
Pewter's lead.
Okay, that makes sense. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, pewter's really cool, but I remember as a little kid, people would get like a mug of a drink, but it'd be in pewter at places. Because they kind of, lead's not that bad for you. Of course, I remember my 8th grade chemistry teacher would put mercury in his hand. Look, see, isn't that fun? But it's really toxic, so don't do this. And I know this sounds like I'm making this up, but I'm not. He actually would soon be in Warm Springs. So with that, Mr. Zazula. Isn't it weird how I remember stuff like that? All right, so let's get back to this. Last thing, so trade. So if everyone wants gold, how do we get gold? Because you're not going to find the miracle gold mine. You know, they realized that. The Spanish kind of did, but you know, they realized really quick. But we trade. And what do? We trade. Well, if we have gold, we want people, or we don't want to buy from other countries, because there goes our gold. What do we want? By the way, what do we call trade to other countries? Yeah. We want to maximize exports, more exports. And that means, well, that's because imports take away gold. So if we get rid of imports, that means what we want is our gold's not leaving. We want countries to come to us and buy our stuff. And therefore gold comes in. It's called a favorable balance of trade. More exports than imports. Does the United States have a favorable balance of trade today? Not at all. Significantly more of America's wealth leaves, but then again, mercantilism is not a good policy, so it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. And it's getting, the favorable balance of trade, it's getting more extreme. In the last 2 years, is the amount of imports have just exploded. That's economic policy we can't go over today. And how does the government do this? Tariffs. Tariff is a tax on imports. You raise the tax on imports, that raises the price of imported goods and people don't buy it. And therefore it's hard for countries to trade, and gold stays here. There is a country today, a very large country, that is very mercantilistic. In fact, their entire economy is based upon exporting goods. Anybody know that country? China. China is really mercantilistic. They want to hoard wealth. That has a lot to do with the fact that they had almost all the gold in the world in the 1700s, and they lost it all in about 50 years. Anybody know how they lost it? Opium, yeah.
Classic U.S. movie.
Opium, yeah. All right, everybody. I mentioned chapter 3, right? The quiz?
Yes.
And a little bit of reading?
Yes.
And, okay, Monday they will have class. You got to watch online. You know the routine. I will see you all then next. Oh, Wednesday we'll have class.
Yeah.
At 9 o'clock is when I broadcast video on YouTube. Yeah.
Will you tell us online if we
Yes, I'll tell you online, so you don't have to bring them unless I tell you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the quiz is online?
Yeah, it's online, it's on Teams.
Alright.
And I assume that you all did this last semester, maybe I already did one this, or last spring. Did you do a quiz on Teams?
Yeah.
And, alright, this was a short one. I'll do longer ones. I'm still trying to decide. Obviously got to kind of restructure things. I will see you.
Yeah. China's not buying any of her stuff, so I've been hooked on